Hello everyone and welcome to my Season 14 item tier list where we'll be ranking all the items in League of Legends, all the completed ones anyway, both new and old, just to give you guys a general idea of how powerful they are or not. So the way I'm going to categorize this is S tier, higher up on the list, probably going to be items that are bought on lots of different champs or are kind of, they're so OP that if your champ can buy it, they should at the moment. They kind of define the meta and the champs that are strong around it. As we go down, items are going to get a bit more niche, get a bit less powerful, and just be less bought in general. Down to D tier, where these are items that probably are extremely rarely bought, if ever, and no one really prioritizes them at all. Obviously, it's my opinion, so feel free to disagree. There probably will be things that I'm wrong on because I don't buy literally every item in the game, but we'll go through it and have a look. So let's start with Rod of Ages. I think Rod of Ages probably in the B tier. Rod of Ages is a little bit better in Season 14. It got made a little cheaper. And honestly, there are a few champions, I think, that can use it pretty well at the moment. It remains a good situational item, I think, to rush as well for some mages when they're up against assassins and they don't have another way to get defensive stats in the early game. Obviously, you can rush something like a Zhonya's or Banshees, but having no health makes it a little rough. So there's a lot of champs that can use Roa, but there's not a lot of champs that actually do. And some of the champs that our Roa users will skip it. You'll see champs like Cassio, for example, can go Roa, oftentimes just skips it though and rushes to Ceres first. There are other champs that do this as well, so it's probably like a high B. I think it's a pretty good item overall, but it's not bought so often and not so strong on the champs that it's bought on that I think it could go any higher. Next one is Lichbane. So I think Lichbane is very strong at the moment. They've given it a lot of AP, and there's a few champs in the meta that abuse other items that also really like Lichbane. So stuff like Fizz and Akali, Echo, like these use current OP items, stuff like Storm Surge, Protobelt. They also use Lichbane quite well. Now, I think Lichbane is probably on the lower end of A tier, and that's mainly because it competes with some other very good items. Something we'll talk about, as we go on in the video, is the second item slot for AP champs is pretty competitive at the moment. So even though I think Lichbane is actually really strong, it's competing with some other really damn good items. So I don't think it goes, I don't think it makes it into S tier, but it's definitely an item that a lot of champs can use. And I actually think once some of the more OP items get toned down a little, you will see Lichbane be bought a little more often. Cosmic is kind of in the same boat where I think Cosmic is, it's probably maybe like a high B or a low A as well. I think there are some champs that really like Cosmic at the moment because there aren't that many ways of getting CDR. If you want to play a CDR build, the best thing you can really go right now is something like Seraph into Cosmic, which you do get a couple stats you don't want, right? Like some of those mages like Syndra, for example, give that an extra bit of HP, which, you'd probably rather not have. At the same time, like it's not the end of the world. I think this can be bought second item on champs like, again, Ahri, Syndra. It can be bought somewhere in your build on Vlad. We'll talk about that. Vlad has some other builds that it can go. So, I don't know. It's like a decent enough item, but actually, no, it's a good item. It's just competing with some other really good second options. And I also think at the moment when there aren't as many tanks, at least in my game, so CDR isn't as important. Maybe it's just going full burst builds, but I think it's possible this item gets bought more and more as the season goes on and the meta changes a bit. So keep an eye on Cosmic. I think for now I want it towards like the lower end of A or maybe even in B, but it can go up. Next one is Crypt Bloom. So Crypt Bloom I think is like underrated and overrated at the same time. So the nice thing about Crypt Bloom is it's finally a Void Staff option that's like much more rushable as a second item. So if you really need magic resist in that, or sorry, magic pen because the enemy team has too much MR in the early game, Crypt Bloom is a great way to get it because Crypt Bloom, while it does have slightly less pen and slightly less ability power than the Void Staff, it's cheaper, it's got a nice passive on it, and it's got ability haste on it. So it's a good second item. At the same time, it doesn't scale as well as Void in a sense. Like if they build tons and tons of MR, then Void becomes more valuable. But like also if you're building a lot of AP, the heal on Crypt Bloom gets more valuable. Now sometimes the heal on Crypt Bloom doesn't actually get its full value. So I don't know, it's a bit like you're still kind of not happy, I think, as an AP champ if you're forced into buying like a Crypt Bloom or a Void. That's just I think always going to be the case. Especially when those other items are so strong. But I think it's still pretty good. Like, yeah, you kind of want to be looking towards it. I think while I'm at it, I'll rate the Void Staff. So in my mind, Void Staff is a little lower, which is partially just due to the meta at the moment. I think right now there isn't like a ton of magic resist being bought, and so that makes Crypt Bloom better most of the time. That being said, I think the magic resist items are actually really good. So I think as that gets bought more and more, and honestly, as more tanks into the meta, Void Staff should probably come up and honestly maybe even overtake Crypt Bloom. But I think at the moment, it probably only deserves a C tier. Next is Rabadons. So Rabadons, I think, is a little better this season. It was also more purchasable as a second item. So previously, you could pretty much only ever buy Death Cap second if you had like AP from other sources, you know, stuff like Dark Seal, Eyeball Gathering, etc. But now Rabadon's is OP enough, I think, or not OP enough. It just has enough AP that you can buy it second if you want, especially on champs that have a lot of range. So like I've seen this bought on Xerath second, I've seen it bought on Lux second, for example, Ziggs. At the same time, again, you're competing with some very, very other good options. So I don't think it really makes it any higher than this. I think it's somewhere in B tier. It's still something that you want to fit in your build eventually. Like, you can go Death Cap third a lot of the time. I think it's fine to delay it to fourth. I think delaying it to fifth is like kind of too late for a lot of AP champs unless you're like a utility AP. But you can afford to delay it by maybe like a full extra item compared to before, and it actually still works out. Now, next two items, Liandry's and Riftmakers. So I'm going to rate these items individually, but it is worth noting that Riftmaker Liandry's as a combo is probably S tier, but I think on their own, I think both of them are probably A tier. That being said, I think they're high A tier, so Riftmaker is pretty strong. It's basically, they combine Demonic and Riftmaker from before, so there's a lot of champs that can use this in a really big way. There's also some champions that, you know, there's some champions that rushes out, you know, stuff like Vlad and Rumble. There are also champions that can just build this later in the game, because obviously it gives you extra AP based on like how much bonus health you have, I think, from items. So if you're building, like, let's take Cassidy as an example. If you're building something like Seraph's, Liandry, Rhyolite, at some point, you know, maybe after you get Death Cap, it is worth looking at Riftmaker. So I think there's a lot of champs that can use this item, and I think it says, you know, it speaks to the item's strength that you buy it so early in the game right now on some champs. Liandry's definitely needs to go in the A tier as well. So again, as a combo, I think Riftmaker Liandry's definitely is S tier. Liandry's on its own, though, it's not as strong as old Liandry's for a couple reasons. So the first is that they just nerfed it. You know, I think it used to be that it was like 10% damage amp, and I think the damage dealt was like 1.5% max HP. Off the top of my head, I mean, because it could be wrong. But now, though, it's only 6% and 6% damage amp and 1% max HP. So it just does less damage than before. And also, it doesn't have the old Liandry's passive of if your opponent was like, I think it was immobilized or slowed, they took 2.5% or like double the damage or something. Basically, it used to be that Liandry's Rhyolite as a combo was super broken. And obviously, champs that just had built-in slows or immobilizations was also super broken. So Liandry's is a lot weaker than it was before. But I still think it's actually pretty strong, and there are some champions that are kind of, while there are a lot of second item options for APs, there are some champs that are kind of left without a great option. Like if you're a champ that doesn't really want to burst, like you want to be able to deal with tank. You know, I see champs like Talia maybe looking for the second, something like Seraph's, Liandry's, if you don't want to go for Cosmic. At the same time, like you can just go for Cosmic, right? So it's an item that probably is, again, a bit lower. I think Riftmaker should be higher and a bit separate from Liandry's, but as a combo, it's extremely good still. Just something you should be looking towards. Next is Zhonya. So I have like mixed feelings on Zhonya. So the thing is, like, Zhonya is, I mean, it's more rushable than before in the sense that you could go something like Chapter Zhonya's and that doesn't feel as bad as before, and you don't lose as much damage as before. But Zhonya's is like really expensive, and the build path feels kind of awkward in my mind. So should it go to A tier? I don't really think so, but it probably deserves to be like somewhere in here. I think you can go second item Zhonya's against some comps, and it's pretty good. Especially because they kind of nerfed, you know, items like Cyrilda, so building armor is like a bit more effective than it was before. At the same time, I don't think it really deserves to be high, especially when some of the other second item options are stronger. Next is Horizon. Now, Horizon, I think, is probably C tier or maybe B tier. I'm not sure. So the thing with Horizon is it's actually a pretty good item again. But if you're a champion that really wants to burst or, you know, poke from long range, you're probably still looking at items like Storm Surge and Shadow Flame because these are just stronger items, straight up. So I don't think even the champs that are really good Horizon users, like stuff like Lux, Xerath, Ziggs, are prioritizing Horizon over other options. Like, you can, don't get me wrong, but I really do think it is still worth buying other items at this point, so yeah, probably leave it there. I'm gonna skip PD for now and just try to keep putting in the AP items. So Shadow Flame is a high A tier, if not an S. I think what makes Shadow Flame so OP is actually its synergy with Storm Surge a lot of the time. But I think Shadow Flame is a very strong item. I mean, it's got a lot of stats on it. The effect on it is really nice, so it definitely deserves A tier, and honestly, it maybe deserves S. I think on its own, it's probably just A, but definitely if you buy it with Storm Surge, it makes it to S. So next one is Nash's, and depending, I guess, like what you value will depend where you put Nash's, because I think Nashor's is absolutely like S tier, best in slot on like a bunch of champs. Like it's really good on Gwen, it's really good on Azir, Katarina. There's probably some others that I'm forgetting. Kale, I guess, is another one. So on those champs, it's absolutely absurd. But for the majority of the champs in the game, I don't think there's many champs that actually use Nashor's. I'm kind of tempted to move it down to B tier for that reason. But then like when you compare it to the items here, like I feel like Nashor's is so much better than them. So I'll probably put it in the A tier, but again, like if you're playing certain champs, this item is ridiculous. Next AP item, looks like we have Rocket Belt. So Rocket Belt, I feel like is also very close to S. I think Rocket Belt is really cheap. It's a good way to get a lot of HP, and there's a lot of champions that can use it quite well at the moment. The only reason I think you don't see Rocket Belt more, honestly, is just because, again, there are some other very OP items to rushing, especially on those manaless mids, you know, like the ones that would normally be going Rocket Belt. You have things like Vlad going Riftmaker instead. You have things like Akali going Storm Surge. So it's a really good item, but there are actually better items that exist. Are there any other AP items? Okay, Seraphs. So I think Seraphs is, I would say it's a high B. Like, Seraphs I think is not bad. It is... Okay, so the mana items I feel like aren't amazing to begin with, but, you know, Seraphs, I think it's giving AP, it's giving CDR, it's giving stats that you want. I still feel like I would like Seraphs a lot more if the shield were activatable as opposed to proccing, because I feel like the shield a lot of the time is kind of useless. It's not too bad if you're a short range champ. Like, again, I'll use Cassio as an example. A lot of the time, if your shield procs on Cassio, it's fine, because chances are you're in the middle of a fight, like you're DPSing anyway. If you're playing a range champ, sometimes you just get like, you know, you're in a fight, an ability will like bring you down to shield range and it'll proc, but you were actually in no danger. Like you were far enough away anyway. And I think that makes me keep it out of putting it in a higher tier, but it is decent. I think, again, just the amount of items like aren't amazing overall as a first item rush. Next item, Morello's. So Morello's like a kind of weird one. Like, again, I think Morello is like kind of underrated and kind of trash at the same time. So the thing is with Morello, it has pretty good stats. It's got ability haste on it. And obviously it gives healing reduction. But are you really going to buy it over the other second item options? And I feel like the answer so far has been no. Like I haven't seen really anyone prioritize Morello. So that makes me want to put it in B tier. At the same time, I feel like this is like potentially the item I'm least confident about in the entire game at the moment. Like I think there's a chance that Morello is actually like really good, because there is a lot of just like random healing in the game, and I think that people underestimate, like in the past, buying Morello was such a DPS loss that even if it gave healing reduction, a lot of the time it was kind of useless. But I think if you're an AoE champ and you can actually apply healing reduction, there's a fair amount of healing in the game. And the stats on it are already quite good, so there's a chance this should be higher. I think for now I'm going to put it in B tier because it really just hasn't been bought a whole lot, but there's a serious argument for this moving higher, and I think it's an item that, you know, we should definitely keep an eye on. Next AP item on here, skip all the... Okay, Storm Surge. So Storm Surge, without a doubt, is an S tier item. I think this is one of the best, if not the best, item in the game at the moment, and I think the whole mid-meta is kind of revolving around this. If you're not building this, you're probably building, you know, this combo instead. It's so broken. I think champs can rush this really easily. You know, the manaless ones can go something like Storm Surge Shadow Flame. I think there is honestly potential for some champs to go Chapter Storm Surge Shadow Flame. Like, I think stuff that is building Ludens at the moment, stuff like Syndra and LeBlanc, you know, if you got an AP variant of LeBlanc, I think you probably should experiment with Chapter Storm Surge Shadow Flame. I did try on Syndra specifically, just Storm Surge Shadow Flame, and you can make it work, but I think having such low ability haste feels kind of strange. So I kind of like the Chapter Storm Surge Shadow Flame. It's definitely worth experimenting with. But yeah, I think overall these items, they're pretty strong for sure, and this one is just insane. Any more AP items? I think there's must be a couple more. Oh yeah, okay, so Malignance. Malignance, in my mind, is decent, but not for the reasons that people think. So I think the Hate Fog passive on this is completely useless. Like, I honestly think the little, you know, the little thing that spawns underneath and does damage is complete trash. At the same time, just having 20 ultimate haste is really, really good for solo queue. Also, it's cheaper than your other mana items. And also, it's like, you know, compared to the other mana items, it does kind of have a niche as like an early spike, right? So like if, for example, you want mana and you want Roa or Seraphs, you have to wait for the scaling. If you want Ludens, well, to be honest with you, Ludens is kind of weak. So it's basically just like if you want an earlier spike and you still want mana, Malignance is your go-to, and the ultimate haste is nice, but I don't think it makes it out of B tier. Like, in my mind, it's not actually that great for Hate Fog. I really wish they buffed the Hate Fog passive on it, because I think it's kind of not that useful. Our next one here is Banshee. So I think Banshee Banshee's like a little higher than Zhonya's for me at the moment. I think it's probably like somewhere in here, maybe. So I think Banshee second is kind of good and kind of bad at the same time. So the reason Banshee good is second is because it counters the flat magic pen, right? So if you're building Banshee into someone that's going Storm or Shadow Flame, that feels really, really good. But I think the problem with Banshee is like most builds aren't going to have HP to synergize with it. Like if you're going Seraph's Banshee, I guess that kind of works. Like you have HP from your shield, but the item itself isn't giving HP. Now you don't necessarily need HP to synergize with it. It's just like nice if you can have it. Now I guess worth noting is that there is like the Ingenious Hunter for the item CD with the Banshee cooldown. I think the spell shield cooldown is only 30 seconds and you can make it even lower. So honestly, maybe Banshees could creep into A tier just because it counters the current meta. It is a good second item. But you really have to be playing a champ that isn't reliant on another second item. You know, like if you're playing a champ that's really reliant on the CDR from Cosmic second, or really needs a Liandry's to kill tank second, you can't really afford to go Banshees. Because even though Banshees has a lot of AP on it, it's missing a lot of other stats that you might need. So it's like, it's probably like more powerful in its good spots, but it's also like harder to buy than it used to be, I think. Yeah, something like that. It could maybe go higher though. Ludens. I think Ludens is pretty bad. I think Ludens is probably the worst of the AP mana items. It feels quite strange. I think it's so often the charges just get spread and then don't do a whole lot of damage. I feel like the charges themselves don't even do a lot of damage. So I think most champs are better off. If you really want Ludens, you're probably better off going Chapter Storms or Shadow Flame, or you might even be better off going Seraphs. Depending on your champ, you can even go Malignance or like Roa into like something else. So I don't know. I think Ludens definitely needs a buff at the moment, and I can't think of many champs that really like look forward to buying Ludens. It's really just they're buying Ludens because they can't really buy anything else. Any other AP item? Okay, so we have Medjai's. I think I will preface this by saying I love Medjai's. Like Medjai's is probably my favorite item in the entire game. But I have to be honest with you, I think at the moment it kind of sucks. So the thing with Medjai's is it's insanely efficient if you get it fully stacked. Even at 10 stacks, it's quite nice because you get the movement speed. The problem with Medjai's is you can only buy it really if you're pretty certain you're not going to die. And at the moment, the burst in this game is so high. And honestly, it could just be that because I'm like taking time to get used to like the new damage values, but I feel like I'm just dying all the time. So if that's the same for you guys, I would recommend staying away from Medjai's. I think sometimes I've noticed that if you're playing like a tankier champ, like for example, if you are building Liandry's Riftmaker Rylai on a Swain or a Cassio Rumble, something like that, Medjai's actually kind of works just because you are really tanky and the movement speed is nice. But I would be very careful buying Medjai's. Like my mindset with Medjai's has always been like, if I'm certain I won't die, I would just fuck it. I'm going Medjai's. It's such a good item. But I think it's really risky at the moment, and it's probably like, look, it's a big dick move. I'll say that. You're making sure the enemy mid is inferior to you, and they know it. But for win rate, I think it's not the best. Honestly, it could be S tier just for the message it sends, though. I love that. I fucking... Okay, any other AP items? I think it's just Rylai. So Rylai, I think, in my opinion, Rylai's last season was really good. I thought Rylai's was very underrated because it was relatively cheap and it gave pretty good stats. And I think the slow went... Obviously, there were champs that used it really well. But I think, honestly, even on some champs that maybe weren't core Rylai's users, I think it was an underrated item just because it was giving so much HP alongside it. And if you needed kind of like a defensive item, but you didn't want to fully itemize like a Zonya or a Banshee, I actually think it was pretty decent. The only problem with Rylai's is I feel like it's a bit left behind this season. It hasn't been changed at all. But there are so many other better second items to choose from. And I think also it's like, a lot of the time, like, let's say you're going something like, if you're going Seraph's Liandry, like, you could go Rylai third, but you can also go Deathcap third, right? So it's, like, hard to fit into Rylai's, and you could also go Riftmaker third, and then if you're a champ that's going, like, Roa, Seraph, Riftmaker, I mean, you can go Rylai's, but then we probably want a Liandry's. So it just feels like it's hard to fit in the build at the moment. Maybe it's still good later on in the game, and honestly, maybe there are still some champs that should be using it, like ASOL, for example, because again, like, the item hasn't really changed. I just feel like compared to the other items that are now available and just like the order we're building things in, I feel like it's kind of mediocre. So that's all the AP items out of the way. Next, I'm going to go to the support items while I remember. So first off, Echoes of Helia. I'm pretty sure this item just sucks. I don't see anyone build it anymore. I think there are way better options for supports to purchase at the moment. Next, we have Locket. So I think Locket is definitely somewhere in A tier. You see this rushed out on a lot of tank supports at the moment, and it's definitely like a go-to choice. Like a lot of the time you're choosing between Trailblazer and Locket. So where would it go? I think somewhere about here. I think it's a really solid support item. It's not like It's not so broken that you can't buy anything else, but it's still pretty good overall. Another support item here is Celestial. I can't even remember the full name. Celestial something. But I think this is really, really good. I see a lot of supports buy this. It's basically like a crown effect for supports. It's great on tank supports. It's even great on some range supports, just so you don't die. And I think this item is, without a doubt, very, very strong. Next up is Zeke's, and I think Zeke's is somewhere between A and B. I think Zeke's is still rushed out on a lot of supports, and a lot of the time you're choosing between, Locket, Zeke's, Trailblazer. I feel like it's probably the weakest of those three, though, so it's probably like a high B, like somewhere around here, or maybe it's at the very bottom of A. I'm not too sure. I mean, I don't play a lot of tank supports, so it's not an item that I build very often, and so I could be wrong on this, but just what I've observed, I think it's probably about here. Next support item, this is Bloodsong. This item is really, really broken. So this is like the Sheen effect that increases the damage dealt to the target. There's a lot of supports going this. There's a lot of even non-supports going this, with the double support bot lane a lot of the time building this. So I think, Bloodsong definitely deserves the S tier here. Knight's Vow. So Knight's Vow is probably D or C, maybe the very bottom of C or D. So the problem is, like, Knight's Vow, I mean, not too bad an item, but it's just competing with a lot of other items. So at the moment, you see a lot of supports just going, again, stuff like Trailblazer and Locket. You even see some supports going towards the cheaper tank items, things like Frozen Heart. I'll leave that to the tank section, but, Frozen Heart is an option for a lot of champs. So feels like Knight's Vow just kind of gets left to the wayside a lot of the time and just doesn't really find its place. Is it okay? Yeah, I mean, it's still okay. And to be honest, this can be bought in other roles. If you're playing something low econ, like a jungle rel or an on top or something, I could see you fitting it in your build at some point. But overall, I think there are better items. Next one is Staff. I think Staff definitely is an A tier. Not too sure where. Maybe somewhere in here. I think it's pretty good. Obviously, if you can apply it AoE, a lot of movement speed is really, really nice. The AP is pretty good too. Yeah, not too much to say about Staff. I think it's just a solid overall item and should be somewhere in the A tier. Next one here is Arden. Arden also, I think, is A tier because there are a lot of 80 carries that do use on hit. At the same time, there are also a lot of 80 carries that use lethality at the moment. So I think that you need to be a bit careful buying this. Like, I don't think you can just buy Arden without thinking. And depending on what 80 carry you have, Arden can easily be S or it can easily be like a C tier item. Sometimes you can still buy it if other champs on your team have, like champs that benefit from it. So I'll probably put it here, maybe at a high B. Yeah, I'm not too sure. Somewhere in here, I feel like it's like reasonably strong, but not like insanely out of this world strong. Next support item is Solstice Slay, and I think this also is somewhere in the C tier, probably about here. The thing is, I think it's just undertuned compared to the other support options, mainly because these two are so good. I pretty much never see this bought. I've seen it bought a few times, but I really think most supports at the moment can go something else. Like you see the Ardent supports go for Dreammaker, and then pretty much everyone else is going for these two. Or if you're an AP support, obviously you're going for the Realm Spike one, which we'll put on this list. I think Realm Spike is pretty good. I think it's actually, pretty high in the B tier. I think maybe there's an argument for A, just because on the champs that build this, it is, like, really, really good. Like, maybe it's a low A. I think overall, though, like, those sort of supports aren't as strong at the moment. So maybe this is a bit weird because I feel like the item might be strong, but then maybe those supports aren't strong. I think it's really difficult to be a super squishy, like, AP mage support. If we think of the likes of something like a Lux or a Zerath, I feel like whenever I see a squishy support, they're always going Celestial just to survive at the moment. So I think Realm Spike maybe is stronger than I'm giving credit for, but I think at the moment is probably just, yeah, it's probably like somewhere in here. Like, honestly, it could probably go anywhere in here. Until the meta changes, I think it's probably going to remain a little bit on the weaker side. What else do we have here? We have Trailblazer. So I think Trailblazer is a pretty high A. I think it probably goes along with Locket, maybe a tiny bit higher. I think this is, if you're playing a tank support, a lot of the time you will be rushing out the Trailblazer, and it seems like a pretty strong item. I mean, it's relatively cheap. Gives you a lot of engage options. So I'm a big fan of Trailblazer, and it already got nerfed, which probably keeps it out of S tier, but I think it's definitely a strong item. What else do we have? Okay, so next is Dawncore. So Dawncore, I think, is a really interesting item. I almost want to put Dawncore in A because I think, okay, the nice thing about Dawncore is a lot of the time, if you're building, like, let's say you're playing an Ardent support, like, a lot of the time what you'll have is you have something like your Ardent Sensor, you might get your Staff, and then you might be stuck for a third item. Like, if you can't build Mandate and maybe you really don't want Redemption, I think Dawncore is almost like the Rabadons of support items. That being said, like, how often do you get to just like 3 items as an ardent support and still have nothing to buy? Like you don't want Redemption, you don't want Mikhail's. I feel like not that often. I don't know though. It's got really good stats on it. I'm not too sure about this item. I think it could probably be about here, but I wonder if it's just too niche to actually get there. I'm not sure. I feel like this item, yeah, somewhere around here, probably has more potential, but at least at the moment we don't see it a whole lot. Next one. So this is Dreammaker. I think Dreammaker is pretty strong. I think Dreammaker is probably an A. I think that there are a lot of supports that can use this, and I honestly think like Ardent-esque supports are kind of underrated at the moment. Especially the ones that can keep you alive from assassins. You know, I think 80 carries, especially in solo queue, not so much in competitive, but especially in solo queue, have a lot of time surviving at the moment. And I think the right Ardent supports definitely do well to counter this. So I think it's probably in this. Maybe argument for B tier. I'm not sure. Again, I don't really play any of these Ardent supports, but my observation has been that if you're playing an Ardent support, you're almost definitely buying this. And it looks pretty strong to me. Our next one is this thing. I don't even know what this is called. Is it Watchful Wardstone or Vigilant Wardstone? I'm not sure, but literally no one buys this. I see this never bought, and so it's probably just going to go in the D tier. I mean, I think it's kind of meant to be like something you upgrade later in the game, but like never are you really getting to ultra full builds, so I think it's probably just in the D tier, unfortunately. Next one is Shurelya's, and I feel like Shurelya's is not amazing at the moment. Like, I feel like it's decent, but I feel like almost every other support rushes something else. Like, it can still be bought, but in my mind, it's like a pretty low B tier at the moment. I think the other items are just a little bit better. Mikhail's, so Mikhail's is like kind of a weird one because I think a lot of the games where you would be building your Mikhail's, ADCs will probably take cleanse, and then your Mikhail's might not actually be that valuable. At the same time, like, if your ADC doesn't have cleanse, there will be some games where you just absolutely have to buy Mikhail's no matter what. Do I think the item is actually that good though? Like, probably not. I think it's probably, you know, pretty average. Maybe even falls down to C tier. Like, yeah, I feel like, I'm not sure. Again, it kind of depends because there are some games where, like, you could argue this is S tier because if you don't have it, like, your ADC can't play the game or whatever, right? But at the same time, like, do you ever really want to buy Mikhail's? Like, in my opinion, no. It feels a lot worse than buying items like this. So I think probably like a high C, but it really, again, it depends how you value it. In some games, it's absolutely S tier if your ADC doesn't take cleanse, but a lot of the time, I think it can be kind of troll to buy it over other items. Moonstone, so I think Moonstone is pretty good. I think it's somewhere in the high B. I don't think it makes it quite into A. Maybe it's just like mid B tier somewhere here. Like, I think it's a pretty decent option. But I think, again, there are other items that are being rushed a lot of the time. That being said, there are a lot of supports that exclusively just rush Moonstone because it's so good on them, you know, as opposed to rushing something like Arden. They might go like Moonstone Arden. So, I don't know. It's really champ dependent. I think overall the item isn't like, it's not out of this world broken, but it's on the champs that it's good on. It's very, very good. And then I think it's just, Mandate and Redemption, it looks like. So Mandate, I think, is really good. I think Mandate probably makes it into the A tier. I don't think it's like super high in A tier, but honestly, it's probably alongside the staff. Like, I think it's pretty good, and there's champs that can definitely apply it well at the moment. Also, worth noting is that Mandate can be bought in other roles a bit easier now. Like, you can go, you know, for example, I saw a Karma build where they went like Malignance Mandate, and that seemed pretty strong. It can be a cheap way to get some nice stats for the more like, not like supportive mids, but the ones that can be more like utility. So it's something to look out for, I think, the Mandate. Anathema's Chains, I feel like I'll probably class it under support. I don't see this bought in top lane or jungle that much, but basically, I don't think this is an amazing item. Like, it's really, really good if there's, you know, one target that you really need to deal with. At the same time, it's like, a lot of champs can't really get to this until like third item or something. And even then, there are other cheaper tank items that you would want at the moment, like Frozen Heart being the big one. So I feel like Anathema's Change is probably pretty low in C tier. At the same time, like, maybe there's arguments that it could go a little bit higher. And then finally, Redemption. So I'm of the opinion that Redemption is not that great. I feel like Redemption is probably also somewhere in the B tier. I feel like with the items it's competing with, or a lot of the time it's just like left out. Yeah, probably like somewhere around here. I'm not really a fan of Redemption at the moment. Now I think we'll move on to the tank items. So the tank items are kind of a mixed bag. I think there's a lot of choices and a lot of them just get crowded out by other ones. So Heartsteel, I think, is somewhere firmly in the B tier. I think there are definitely better tank options, but there are some champs that really like the health that can, you know, benefit from it. I feel like it's probably about here, though. Like, in my mind, it's not a great tank item overall. Jackshaw, on the other hand, is potentially an S or maybe an A. So the thing is, I'm cheating a little bit with Jackshaw because Jackdaw was bought a lot on 80 carries at the moment, but it's an exceptionally good tank item for 80 carries that are going Terminus. So that can definitely be a thing. It's also good as like a later item on the mega tanks in top lane. At the same time, like you're not going to be rushing it super early, so you could maybe make an argument for this being S because it is being bought on champions that perhaps shouldn't buy it. Again, like a lot of those 80 carries building Terminus will buy Jackshaw alongside it. Does it quite make it to there? I feel like it might be a bit unfair. I'm not sure. Like, you could argue that Jackshaw is in S. I think it's overall like a pretty damn strong item. Sunfire. Sunfire should probably be somewhere in B as well. I want to say it's like somewhere around here, maybe. Like, a Sunfire still feels reasonably strong, but I think there are better tank items. Warmogs, I'm pretty sure, is just terrible. I don't really see anyone buy Warmogs at the moment outside of ARAM. Like, I don't think there's... Yeah, I don't really think there's much... yeah, no real redeemable features about Warmogs. It's just kind of a left-behind item at the moment. Force of Nature. So Force of Nature can give you a ton of magic resist, and I think the item is a little underrated. I honestly think the biggest problem with Force of Nature is that the other magic resist items are so good, which is about what we're going to talk about in a moment. So this is probably, yeah, it's probably higher than this, to be honest. It's probably like somewhere in like here, maybe. Like, I think it's a fairly solid option. Yeah, I think it's a fairly solid option overall. But our next one, so this is Hollow Radiance. I think this item is disgustingly broken. I think it should definitely be very high up in A tier. I think that if you're playing a tank mid or if you're playing a tank top and you're against, like, you know, double AP topside or double AP mid jungle, rushing this item here along with Kanik Recurn, these just make you absolutely invincible. Like, I think these magic resist items, especially in a mid meta where there's a lot of flat magic pen, are just absolutely absurd. I've seen Galio mid, like, rushing these items. I've seen Cassante going, you know, these items as well. I'm sure there are more mids, honestly, that could use these, and I think there's, honestly, potential for it to be explored a little more. So, yeah, like, should they be this high at the moment? Maybe not higher than Jackshaw, like, maybe somewhere along here, but I think these items are really good against AP. Obviously, they're also quite good just for... There's a lot of champs that if you need a little bit of MR later on, you can just buy one of these. You know, like, as a top lane tank, a lot of the time you'll be rushing, I don't know, something like Titanic, but then later on in your build, you might look for these. I'll talk about a little bit when I get to the fighters, but it feels like a lot of the time, something like this is even better than more on fighters because they're, you know, you just want to be a little bit tankier against just, like, full AP assassins that are coming out. So definitely don't sleep on these items. I think they're very strong. Next tank item is Frozen Heart, and without a doubt in my mind, this is an S tier item. So this item is so cheap and gives so many stats. There aren't that many champs that just straight up rush it. Like, off the top of my head, I think only Malphite does. But I think it's great on champs, like, once you already have health. I think it's really good on supports as well. You know, going like Celestial into Frozen Heart makes you pretty much immortal. I've seen that on champs like Leona and Nautilus, which seems really strong. So yeah, definitely an item to look out for. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. Randuin's, I feel like, is pretty bad. Like, I think Randuin's is somewhere in the C tier. I don't think it's quite D tier, but in my opinion, it's not a very good item overall. It pretty much never gets bought, like, maybe against, like, full crit 80 carries. But honestly, there aren't even that many of those at the moment. Like, there's a lot of lethality, there's a lot of on-hit. I feel like there isn't like a ton of just crit ADCs, so I feel like it doesn't have like a huge niche at the moment. Next one is Iceborne. So I think Iceborne is pretty good. I think Iceborne is somewhere in here. Like, in my mind, it's a pretty strong item, but it probably shouldn't be as strong as some of the others. It can be a good rush item. There's a lot of champs that don't really have anything else super good to buy that can buy it. There's also some champs with off-tank builds, you know, stuff like Yasuo that will build Iceborne. So I think overall, as a tank item, it's pretty decent. But if you can itemize something better, normally you will. But it's like a fine option if you're not really sure, like 100% what to buy. Next is Abyssal. So I think Abyssal suffers a lot from the same thing as Force of Nature. It feels like the other magic resist items are so OP that there's pretty much no point to buy this. Like, the thing with Abyssal is it's meant to be like, okay, it's giving you like tank stats, it's also giving you a bit of damage. As like an AP MR, you know, sort of thing. That being said, I feel like if you're an AP tank, you actually want Liandry's more than you want Abyssal. And if you want magic resist, you know, like, you don't care too much about the damage, you just want these. So I'm not sure really what niche Abyssal has at the moment. I'm honestly kind of tempted to put it in C tier. I think I'll leave it at the very... is it really better than Luden's? Like, honestly, no. Honestly, it's probably... I feel like pretty much no one buys this item at the moment. Maybe it should be bought more. Like, maybe I'm wrong in this, and maybe it should be bought more, but it feels to me that AP tanks want like Leandries for damage, they want these for MR, you want Spirit Visage for the healing. I feel like it's pretty rare that you look for an Abyssal. Deadman's, I think Deadman's is probably C tier. So the thing I like about Deadman's is you can sell your boots for Deadman's late game if you're 6 items. That being said, like Deadman's as an item itself, I think is not very strong at the moment, does not get bought very often, and yeah, there's just so many other better armor options, like Frozen Heart is really good. The next one we'll talk about when I find it. Yeah, this one here. What's this called? Unending Despair. I think this is a really good item, and I think that is just, yeah, it crowds out these armor options. So Unending Despair, I think, is a really good armor option, and honestly probably would be bought a little more if Frozen Heart wasn't so busted. Even despite that, I think you still buy this a lot because obviously it gives you the health. So you can rush this out as a first item a lot of the time. Probably sits right alongside Iceborne, maybe a little bit lower than Mandate. Yeah, somewhere around here. Like, I think it's a pretty good item on a lot of champs. I don't think it's as strong as the MR tank items, but it's still pretty decent. What else do we have here? Thornmail. I'm pretty sure Thornmail is absolute trash. Like, yeah, I really don't think this item is that good. So the problem with Thornmail is that a lot of the champs that you want healing reduction against don't actually auto-attack you. You know, thinking of things like Soraka or Vladimir, you know, it just doesn't feel like that amazing to have this against. I don't know, like if they have, like, let's say you have Soraka healing an Olaf or something, then like the Thornmail makes sense, right? But I don't know, even then, I feel like it's not that great. I think it's better just to rely on someone else to buy the healing reduction, so not really a huge fan. Spirit Visage, I think it's probably a little higher than, you know, than Abyssal. I think there are some heal tanks that work, and I think also the healing from, which item is it? I think it's Unending Despair, right? That has a ticking heal. I'm literally just going to open my client and check. It is Unending Despair with a ticking heal, right? Yeah, it is. So I think the Spirit Visage Unending Despair combo can be pretty good, like if you get a lot of healing from that. At the same time, you might just be better off, you know, buying one of these alongside it anyway, because I feel like they are much better MR items. So yeah, doesn't feel like it's that much worth it. And I think this is a last tank item here, which I think is Fimbulwinter. I don't think I've seen anyone buy this in like 6 months. So I pretty much have nothing to say about it. To be honest, I'm not sure why people don't buy it. I guess it's just like weaker than these options. Yeah, I'm not well versed enough on this to say why. I guess it just sucks compared to other items, but yeah, pretty much no one builds it. Now we'll move on to fighter items. First one is Hullbreaker. This item got nerfed into the absolute ground. I've only seen like 1 or 2 champs buy it now, and I'm pretty sure it just sucks. So they got rid of, you know, just the obscene tankiness that this gave you, and I honestly think that kind of killed the item, which in my opinion is good. I hated Hullbreaker, and I'm very glad it got nerfed into absolute oblivion, so good to see that gone. Next fighter item, what do we have here? I think Sterix. So Sterix seems pretty good. I think Sterix makes it to A tier. I think a lot of the tank builds, or not the tank builds, a lot of the bruiser builds, you see Sterix as like your 3rd item a lot of the time. So it's pretty strong. Maybe, yeah, probably a bit stronger than these. Definitely an item worth considering a lot of the time. Next one, Shojin. So Shojin also is in a lot of the top lane builds right now, even for champs that you maybe wouldn't expect it on. Also in the jungle, there are plenty of champs that are building Shojin as well. So Shojin, yeah, honestly, there's even 80 carries building Shojin. There's stuff like Corki and Ezreal. Like, yeah, Shojin's pretty damn good. There's a lot of champions in this game that can use it. Honestly, it probably is somewhere around, I want to say like here maybe. Honestly, yeah, maybe about there. I think Shojin is a very, very strong item overall. If you're a champ that can abuse Shojin, most of the time you will. What else do we have? So this one, Sundered Sky, this is an S tier item in my opinion. I think if you're a champ that can rush this, most of the time you will. This goes for both top lane and jungle fighters. I think it's a really, really OP item. You see stuff like Aatrox going Sundered Sky into Shojin. You see some champs going, you know, Sundered Sky just into Cleaver. It's got a lot of versatile options that you can follow up with. And I think it's really, really strong as a first item. Ravenous Hydra, I feel like is not so much a weak item, just that there are better options instead. Like, you know, Ravenous is a lot of the time that item that you would rush, and it feels like, you know, the rush item being Sundered Sky a lot of the time is just better. So I haven't seen a whole lot of Ravenous. You still see it sometimes on champs like Fiora, sometimes on champs like Riven. It probably deserves a spot around here somewhere. I feel like it's like decent, right? I just don't think it's like overbearing by any means. Hexplate is here. I actually think I'm going to skip Hexplate because I think it's more of an 80 carry item. So yeah, I'm actually going to leave that for now. Titanic. So I'm pretty sure Titanic is a high A. maybe like even up here. I see Titanic bought a lot. Like there's a lot of champs that have Titanic in their build. There's a lot of champs that even rush out Titanic pretty early. So in my mind, Titanic is a really good item right now, and it gives you a lot of wave clear. And I think that's a big reason why Ravenous is bought a lot less now too, is Titanic actually just lets you two-shot the wave, which is really, really nice. It probably goes right about here. Death Dance, I feel like Death Dance is pretty average. I think it's, yeah, probably like alongside Ravenous, or maybe like a little bit better than some of these. I'm not really too sure. Like, there's still champs that can use this, but it feels like there are so many fighter options. And also, because the tank items are so strong, a lot of the time you're going like your couple fighter options, and then you're just going tank afterwards, rather than going off tank. So you can still consider Death Dance, but personally I don't consider it to be a overbearing item at the moment. There's a couple more fighter items here, which are Eclipse. So I think Eclipse is actually really good. I think Eclipse is probably pretty high in A tier. I think there are a lot of champs that can abuse this at the moment. Makes you very tanky. You can rush it first, but a lot of the time you'll be picking it up somewhere else in your build. So this is an item that I think is kind of champ dependent, which makes me want to bring it a little bit lower. But there are some champs that really swear by Eclipse at the moment. I think it's kind of like Nash's in that regard. Like, it's maybe not quite as strong as Nash's. Like, Nash's is insanely OP on the champs it's OP on. Eclipse is not quite as OP, but it's still pretty strong. Maybe like bottom of A, maybe like right about here. Anyway, it's a pretty decent item overall. What else is there? So Stridebreaker is kind of good and kind of bad. So there's some champs that just need Stridebreaker in order to cover the distance and, you know, like actually chase people down. But I feel like you don't want to buy Stridebreaker most of the time. So I think it probably lands itself somewhere like, yeah, somewhere around here, just in the middle of B tier. The Chainsword, I think Kempbuck Chainsword, this is a healing cut item for fighters, and it's just completely terrible. I think if you really need healing cut, you just sit on the Executioners, don't upgrade it, but I mean, you can upgrade it ultra late game. I really do think, though, it's probably worth letting someone else build the healing cut most of the time. Wit's End is also a top lane item. I think it's probably somewhere in B tier as well. The thing is, there are champs that can use this, but there are also a lot of top laners that don't want the attack speed, right? So like they want the magic resist, but if you want magic resist, there are these items up here, so there's not much point about it. I think it's probably like pretty low down in the B tier. That being said, like, you know, champs like Aurelia can use this really well, so depending on what champ you're playing, it could maybe go a lot higher. I think overall it's not amazing. I don't know how I skipped Cleaver, but Cleaver is a really strong item as well. I think you see Cleaver in pretty much every, or not literally every, but in a lot of top lane builds at the moment. I think it probably slots in, honestly, maybe even above Mandate. Oh, yeah, maybe even up here. No, I'm putting it higher. Like, Cleaver is really good. I think Cleaver goes around here. Yeah, I think it's a very, very strong item. Is there any other top lane items I'm missing? Like, maybe more. So the thing is, like, more, I would say, is more of an 80 carry item at the moment, because again, the top lane fighters and jungle fighters, they have these options, and I think those are a lot better than more. I think more is really only bought on 80 carries at the moment, and it doesn't feel as overwhelmingly strong as it was in the past. So yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think it's really a top, well, I don't know. Look, you can still buy it. It's just like your other MR items are so strong. There's like, why would you? Unless the more is like really, really busted, and I kind of think it isn't, so I'll leave that to the 80 carries. Lastly, I'll quickly talk about Triforce. So Triforce is kind of in the same boat, where a lot of champs that would use, you know, like Triforce Divine are just building this one instead, the Sundered Sky. Are there still some champs that build Triforce? Yeah, there are. But I think Triforce as a whole is like on the weaker side, and again, I feel like it's more bought on range champs at the moment. That being said, it's honestly just not bought a whole lot. Like, I think Triforce is a bit underwhelming at the moment. Now I want to move on to lethality items, mainly because they're going to be easy to get out of the way. So easy one, Voltaic Cyclo Sword, definitely an S tier item in my mind. There's a pretty good chance that if your champion can use this, it absolutely will, because the item just does a hell of a lot of damage. So definitely an item you want to be looking at if you can use it. Other items that kind of go alongside that, Opportunity is it's an lethality item that gets built pretty much every time. Like, sometimes generally your choice is going to be between Ghostblade and Opportunity, but you see a lot of people prioritize Opportunity higher. I don't think it's quite at the S tier level, but I do think it's definitely somewhere in A tier. I want to say somewhere around here or something. Maybe even higher than that. Yeah, potentially higher than this. I'm not sure. Maybe we could go a bit higher than that. I think it's a really good item overall. Umbral, I think, is kind of not good now. Like, it only really gets built on supports, and even then, I think it's not that great, because it is competing with some other really good items. Like, I've seen stuff like, obviously, like, Senna still builds it, but, you know, you see stuff like, what? Like Pantheon support or Pike that would previously go Umbral just going, like, Voltaic. So that kind of speaks to the strength of this item, and I think, in comparison, Umbral is just, like, kind of lower down the list. I want to say it's, yeah, like somewhere in here with the other, like, less often bought support items, it feels like. Profane Hydra is probably somewhere in the lower end of A. I think that it's like, there are definitely champs that can use this pretty well, but it's still expensive, and I think there are some champs that would use Hydra previously, like Talon or Zed, for example, that definitely aren't using Hydra now, and they're just using the other, like, stronger lethality items. So definitely, like, some champs that can use this, but overall, it's probably, it's a more niche lethality item, I'd say. It's not exactly weaker, but more niche. Now, Hubris, depending on what you value, is either an S or a very high A. I think this item has an insane upside, and the thing is, it's kind of like Darkseal in the sense that it doesn't really have that much of a downside. You know, like, even if you don't get a ton of stacks, it's still a pretty damn effective lethality item, so I want to say it stays just outside of A tier, or sorry, just outside of S tier. Maybe it is S tier. I think this item should be bought more and more now. I think it makes sense. I guess the only thing that kind of holds Hubris back is actually that Voltaic is so strong that a lot of the time you want to rush Voltaic and then you Hubris second. Also, sometimes it can be kind of weird because Hubris scales really well, but sometimes you don't want to buy Hubris first because, you know, with Hubris you want to snowball, but you snowball better with another item. So that maybe, you know, I think it keeps it out of S tier, but it's really good. I think it's right about here or here. You know, there's somewhere in this range, I think it goes. I think it's really strong. What else do we have for the lethality items? Serpent's Fang. I think Serpent's Fang is actually not that great. Even though there are some shields in the game, I really do think that the other lethality items are just really, really broken. It probably is a bit stronger than these, but yeah, I don't think it's like a super good item overall. Collector is kind of in the same boat, so there's still a lot of champs that are building Collector, mainly 80 carries. But I honestly think a lot of them shouldn't be building it and should just be building like lethality options instead. So it is something you can look for. In my mind, it's also kind of in the Umbral tier where it just feels like the other lethality items are better. Especially Ghostblade, like a lot of champs that went like, say, I don't know, Ghostblade plus Collector now should probably be going like Ghostblade Opportunity or something. Ghostblade I think is a really good lethality item. I think it is also like very high tier, probably around here or something. Definitely another one that you should be looking at. The only, I guess, thing is like you're choosing between Opportunity and Ghostblade a lot of the time, and I think it really depends on what you want. Like, I think a lot of the time, actually, Opportunity is better, which makes me want to put Ghostblade lower. At the same time, like, Ghostblade is very, very good on a lot of champs, so maybe they go side by side, and it's kind of like a choice between which one you want. Obviously, you can build both if you really want to. Edge of Night is another kind of weird one. I think Edge of Night, while it is an assassin item, I think in a lot of ways it's actually a fighter item as well. And I think it's actually just not as strong as some of the other options. Like, it's still good, but doesn't make its way into A tier. Like, I kind of don't think so. At the same time, I think it's better than Collector, Umbral, and Serpent's Fangs. So I want to say it's like somewhere right in here. Like, it's another decent option, but probably isn't prioritized over the many other great lethality options. Axiom Arc, I feel like, is just kind of bad. I think of the lethality options, it's probably the worst, and I haven't really seen anyone build this. Despite the changes to it, I think it still hasn't really, you know, hit the mark. Any other lethality options? I guess, like, maybe you would class Manamune in the lethality. Honestly, like, you probably would. So Manamune, I think, is still pretty good. It's not like amazing, and sometimes you see people go like typically you would go like tier lethality item Manamune. Sometimes now you see tier and then 2 lethality items before you pick up your Manamune. It's still pretty good though, and it probably is somewhere in the mid B tier. I want to say like somewhere alongside like Rabadons or something. It's overall kind of solid, but maybe not as strong as it was previously, and I think that's maybe just because lethality options are so strong. Cyrilda got changed pretty significantly, and I think it's a lot weaker than it was before. I think last season Cyrilda was an easy S tier item. I think now Cyrilda it's still bought a lot. Like, a lot of the time you are picking up Cyrildas as your 3rd item or something, but is it like an amazing item? I don't really think so. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Like, it's probably somewhere in here. I feel like it's still, I don't know, it's decent, but is it better than these items? Like, maybe no. Probably like sits alongside the Manamune here. I think that's it for lethality items. So finally, we move on to the 80 carry items. First one is PD. I feel like PD is a pretty good item, but it is hard to fit in the build. There's a lot of items that can be built before PD in the current meta, so yeah, I don't know. It can be built 3rd item for some crit 80 carries, but even then, I feel like a lot of the time you want like a BT or an LDR or something before you're looking for your PD. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think It is a good item though. That's the thing. It's like a good item. It's just there are better choices. Should probably be somewhere in the mid B tier along with these other items along here. Kraken. So Kraken might be an S tier item or potentially an A. I honestly think it's probably an S. So the thing is, Kraken obviously is key to a lot of the crit builds. Can work in a lot of the on-hit builds too. That being said, like some people are dropping Kraken to go things like Storm Razor, you know, just because there are less tanks. So that makes me think Kraken is like a high A instead of an S, but like realize I guess there's an argument for it. I think I'll leave it at a high A, but it's pretty close, I think. GA. So GA I think is pretty terrible as an item. I think the reason GA gets bought is because, at least in the past, it was like harder to get tanky as an AD carry. So like your one way of surviving burst was to go GA. The thing is now though, there are actually better ways of dealing with this, which we're going to get to. And one of those ways is Terminus. So Terminus plus Rageblade Jackshow, like that combo, that's really strong. Like if you have these two items in a Jackshow, you can be absolutely unkillable. You know, you a lot of times see stuff like Callisto, Cogmore picking up their Jackshow 4th item, and if they have a Terminus alongside it, they're absolutely unkillable. The items on their own, though, I think aren't as strong. I think they make it into A tier just because they have that really strong combination. But it really has to be a combination, right? Like these aren't items I think that you can just buy on their own. But they probably should go like somewhere in here. Like I think, yeah, both of these, especially combined with Jackshow, are very, very strong. The two big lifesteal items, which is Shieldbow and BT, I feel like both of them aren't amazing, but they're decent, right? So I think, yeah, like depending on what kind of damage profile you're against, they can be good, right? Like if you're against something like Poke, then BT gets like mega value. At the same time, if you're getting one shot by assassins, like BT really isn't going to do anything for you. And a lot of the time, Shield Bow, like while it is a bit more HP, if you've got no resistances to back it up, it actually doesn't really mean anything. So I think in the Ultra Burst meta, neither of these actually find a lot of value. BT is probably like a little bit higher, I feel like around here, and Shield Bow, depending on the comp, can be valuable. But I think overall, like both of the items like really aren't that great. I want to say somewhere like here. Yeah, it doesn't feel like it's that good. Essence Reaver, I think, is kind of good. So Essence Reaver has been buffed and then bought more and more. I've seen some people buying it on Ezreal. I've seen it bought on Corki. What else have I seen it bought on? I've seen it bought on like Lethality Vayne. That being said, a lot of these champions do have other builds, and like it's not necessarily their best build, right? Like I think Corki's best build at the moment is the Eclipse build. I'm pretty sure the best Ezreal build still involves Triforce over ER. So like while there are options for this, I think, yeah, maybe it doesn't actually make it into A tier. Like thinking about it, is there any champ that like just loves Essence Reaver? Like even Lucian doesn't build it. I think I take it back. I think it is a good item, but I think there are better options overall. So it's probably going, yeah, somewhere in the mid B. I think it's like along with PD, like a good item, but it kind of like falls away compared to other items. Navori. Navori is a item where it's like Nashor's really, where it's like absolutely absurd on certain champions. So if you think of things like Xayah, Tristana, it can be really, really good on, but you know, Zeri is another one. That being said, like I think Zeri is building the tank build now. I actually can't quite remember. But yeah, it feels like while it is a great item on the champs it's good on, there are a lot of champs that have just given up Navori right now, but there's still enough, I think, similar to Nash's, where it should still be placed here. So Shiv, I think, is kind of average. I think Shiv is actually like kind of bad for most champs. There are some real hard abuses of it, you know, stuff like LeBlanc. But I think most champs don't really use Shiv very well at the moment. You see a lot of people going for Storm Razor or Voltaic instead. So overall, not a strong item. I just realized I probably should have put Bork under the fighters because not a whole lot of 80 carries use Bork at the moment. But okay, if we're talking about both fighters and 80 carries, I still think it's kind of, it's like pretty average. Like I don't think Bork, outside of specific champs, you know, stuff like Aurelia that use it really well, there aren't that many champions that actually buy Bork at the moment. So I think it's probably like somewhere along wit's end where situationally, good item, but just isn't bought on enough champions. LDR, I feel like LDR is somewhere just like solidly in B tier. Like it's an item that you kind of just have to buy as an 80 carry sometimes, but I feel like it doesn't feel that great to buy. So I'll probably put it like somewhere around here. Honestly though, like maybe I just hate this item because it doesn't feel good to buy compared to other items, but it is actually a strong item. Like to be honest, it should probably go higher. Like if you need to deal with tanks as an 80 carry, like this is the way you're dealing with it, but obviously other items feel a lot better. Storm Razor, so this is a good first item on some champs. At the same time, it's not like a super broken item, I don't think. It probably is, probably at the low end of A tier, or maybe another high B. I'll put it at a high B. Like, I think it's overall a pretty strong item. Is that too high? Like, maybe it comes down a bit. Maybe it's like here. It's a pretty strong item, but I don't think it's like something that the meta revolves around. Something the meta does revolve around, though, is this item. So, Experimental Hexplate. the one that gives you a bunch of attack speed when you ult and some HP. This is being bought on a lot of AD carries because it makes you tankier, and so that can be a really good third item. Like if you don't want a BT or something, you can just buy this instead. Some champs are also buying it very early. You see stuff like Twitch going for the Borg into Hexplate. I can't remember off the top of my head, I think the Zeri build was like Hexplate, Runarms, Titanic. I think the Runarms wasn't right. But anyway, there's some like real bullshit builds with this. You'd have to look them up. Actually, you won't have to look them up. I'm making a build video tomorrow probably. But yeah, I think this item is super, super broken, and pretty much every AD carry can find a way to use it right now. Obviously, if you're playing like a Lethality champ, like you probably don't want it, but pretty much everything else does. And I think it's a really, really broken item overall. More. So I talked about this a little bit under the fighter section already. More is like kind of the best AP or MR option available to AD carries, and it still doesn't feel amazing. Like I think it's another item kind of like LDR where, well, actually not kind of like LDR, like More used to feel really good to buy because it made you just absolutely invincible to these champs. But the problem is like, you can't really buy More second. And to be honest, like that's really when you need it, because like these double magic pen items are coming in and you still have no magic resist. So like, yes, we get your More third, but that's after what, like 5 deaths or something? I think you can sit on a Hex Drinker and upgrade to More later in the game, and maybe that's good. But at least to me, I feel like More is kind of not as good as it used to be. So yeah, I mean, maybe you can still buy it against mages later on. You know, like mages, especially if you buy a third item versus mages, like they're probably not going to have voids. They're probably going to have like Rabadons or other, you know, other situational items. So maybe it gets some value there, but I think it's kind of fallen off. Like I think More used to be A or even S. I feel like, oh, I don't know. Like maybe I'm thinking about this wrong. Like it feels like in a meta where there's a lot of flat magic pen, More should be really, really good. But it just feels like you can't buy it super early. Yeah, I think that's why. It's like you can't buy it super early, and if you want to be tankier, you're better off playing, you know, something like Terminus Rageblade Jackshow, or you're better off playing something like Experimental Hexblade. So I think it just doesn't really have as much of a niche anymore. IE, I think IE is honestly not even that great an item. I think it's like in B tier. So the thing is, like, if you are a crit 80 carry, like obviously you're going to buy an IE, and it's still good. But the thing is, it's like, you know, previously pretty much every 80 carry, just the way the mythics works, we're going like, you know, first item and then first item and then Navori or IE. That's pretty much how it went. But now you see IE delayed until sometimes third, sometimes fourth, and sometimes, obviously, because of on-hit and lethality builds, there are builds without an IE even in it. So if you're a crit 80 carry, of course, like IE is still quite good if you don't want Navori. But just because there are so many other options now, and because it's not core to so many builds, I actually don't think it's like a super high tier item anymore. I think it's just like a solid B tier. Obviously, there are some champs that use this very, very well, but in terms of like the meta overall, no, I don't think it's like super OP. Rapid Fire is kind of sitting in the same boat. I think it's a great third item, but there really are just like better options, right? Like, are you going to go towards Rapid Fire before you go to something like PD? Like, probably not. Are you going to go towards it before some like resistances? Again, probably not. It's probably like a luxury item that you pick up later in the game, unless you're playing certain champions that really want to abuse the range. Yeah, you're probably looking at like a 4th or 5th item, and even then, I think there are other options. So for me, Rapid Fire, probably like pretty low down in B tier. Mortal Reminder, yeah, this item's terrible. That should just be sit on the Executioner and don't upgrade it. Runons, I think Runons, okay, champ dependent can be really good. Like there are some champs that really like Runons at the moment. It's kind of giving me Nash's vibes, where there are some champs that really like to abuse it. That being said, I don't think it's as overbearing as Navori and Nash's. I think it's probably like a low A, and honestly, maybe it's even like a bit below that. I want to say like somewhere in here, maybe. Yeah, somewhere in here. I feel like it's a pretty decent item, but not OP. And the last two items here, Mercurial. So Mercurial is kind of good. I think a lot of the time this doesn't get built now is just because if you're in a game where you really need this, you probably want Cleanse instead. Unless you're against something like Malzahar or Mordekaiser or something, and in which case, you know, it probably is a really good item. But I think, like, how often do I see this at the moment? I want to say pretty much never. That being said, I feel like it can't really be lower than B tier just because it does have some really OP use cases. But, like, again, those don't come up very often, so it probably stays off. And finally, Triforce. So I feel like Triforce is kind of, both for fighters and for AD carries, is pretty mediocre at the moment. I can't think of that many champs that are building Triforce. In fact, I probably should have put this on the fighters, honestly, because I don't think many AD carries are buying at the moment. Where would it go, though? I think it's just a very B tier item, like, I don't know, somewhere in here, maybe. I don't think Triforce is that great. I feel like most fighters abuse this better, and I feel like most AD carries have different builds that work better for them. So that is going to be the end. I think I'll scroll out a little bit, just so you guys can see past my cam. That's going to be the end of my Season 14 item tier list. This should give you a rough estimate just of how powerful the items are. Obviously, there are some things that can be moved around depending on how you value them. There will also be items on this list that I underrate, either because I don't play the champs as good on, or just I haven't seen it enough. So, please let me know in the comments what you guys think. I'll be happy to, read over those. And honestly, if you have some hate comments, hey, it fuels the algorithm, we'll be fine. Tomorrow there'll be a build video, I hope, which will have builds for all champions in the game, and then you'll probably see a lot of these items featured there. Otherwise, guys, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.